and welcome to Conversations Worth Your While, a show in which I chat with authentic, heart-centered experts about interesting topics to spark, inspire, and motivate both personal and professional change. Today's topic is why your story matters to the world. And this conversation is worth your while because we live out our story every single day, and only we have the power to change the story that we are living and transform the way that we show up. Life is short, and it's never too late to show up more bravely and more authentically. So let's start today with this conversation. I'm Linda Bucher. I'm a transformational speaker and a master certified life coach. And so I was living a story that was not indicative to the life I wanted to live. As a matter of fact, I was living the life of a chameleon and feeling like a victim for 45 years until I finally discovered who I am through my own transformational process. And I connected with my passion and my purpose, and I reinvented my life to align with my true self. And when you do that, guess what? You're more happy, you're more confident, you're more fulfilled, and then what's more beautiful about that is when you do that, and it happened for me, it resulted in me confidently unleashing my gifts into the world. So now it's my honor, my privilege to help you do the same in your life, because you have a rich, full life to lead. You have important gifts to give to the world. You have a splash to make. And for that to happen, you've got to do 5 things. You've got to know your worth. You've got to become clear on your purpose. You've got to harness your gifts and own your power. You've got to align your energy and direction and your focus with all of that. And you've got to free yourself from the obstacles that want to hold you back. So if you want to learn a little bit more about that, you can just connect with me right on my website, lindabucher.com. There's a form, there's ways to have a conversation with me. So go ahead and head there. But today I have the pleasure of being joined by Ally Berthiaume of The Right Place, Right Time. I mean, that right there, you're like, oh my God, I'm in this conversation. I'm right here today. This is the right place and this is the right time. I can tell you that right now. Ally is making positive ripples in a very unique way. Ally helps people to make an impact in the world by honoring their past and their stories, which not only activates a stronger sense of self and a new layer of healing, but it serves as a pathway for others. Hi, Ally. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super pumped to have this conversation.
I know, me too. So can you tell everyone a little bit more about who you serve, what you do, how you're making your own beautiful ripples in the world?
Yeah, so I serve people across North America and Europe. They tend to be entrepreneurs, visionaries, leaders, speakers, and they've reached a certain point in their life where they are ready to own something that they've been through and get it down onto the page. So they're ultimately hoping to have a book on the other side, either within memoir or thought leadership. Memoir is my favorite, so I always hope that they lean that direction. And but really what I'm doing beyond helping them get a book into the world is really activating a sense of self, a sense of ownership of what they've been through, and a new layer of healing. Like, I think about it like one of those games where you unlock a new level. Like, that's kind of the work that I'm doing in this space, even though it's within publishing and it's within writing. It's really so much more personal transformation than it is anything else.
Oh, absolutely. 100%. So that is beautiful. I love this beautiful work that you're doing in the world. We have 2 different ways of helping people transform and heal so that we can make a bigger difference in the world in a more positive way. And so whatever way works for anyone, I'd say go do it, because you won't even recognize your old self anymore. It's so amazing. So let's start by talking about why our stories do matter to the world.
My gosh. So I think that there's 2 parts here. They matter to ourselves and have the ability to have a ripple effect just within us. And then they also have the ability to impact others and have the ripple effect kind of outwardly. So I like to say that books have these intrinsic transformations and also extrinsic, transformations. Intrinsically, the more that we own our story, the more we accept our shadow and our light side, the more that we step into our full power, because instead of trying to hide or be ashamed of mistakes, failures, faults, right? We're saying, no, I'm a full human being and I'm still okay and good enough, regardless of circumstances, bad choices, mistakes that I've made, quirks that other people find less than appealing, whatever it is. And when we step into full ownership of who we are, what we've been through, then we are stepping more fully into being able to show up in the world more bravely, more authentically, more confidently. And that has its own domino effect in our own lives. Like, it just sets off a momentum to call in the things that you are meant for, because you're no longer hiding behind the shadow or the dark door or whatever it is. And when we do that, that automatically also has that momentum for others, because when other people see us owning who we are, living more authentically, other people want a little bit of that. They're like, what is she taking? I want a little bit of that. Like, send it my way. And that is how we cascade, right? Like, more importantly, though, beyond bravely showing up or authentically showing up, to me, the bigger and deeper piece of this is the healing piece. When we start to look at what we've been through differently in a way that we understand that there's a lesson to be learned there, that we are strong and powerful and resilient beings because of what we've been through, and we step into thriving versus victim mindset, or excelling versus just getting by, living instead of just existing, we are activating a whole different layer of the human experience. And when we do that and we share our stories, and then other people say, oh my gosh, me too, I've been there, that similar thing has happened to me, I once felt like that, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. Like, all of a sudden we've connected on this level of humanity that we're not doing enough of now. And we're coming together realizing that regardless of where we live, our ages, our races, our religions, our belief systems, we have all been through the crud of the human experience. And when we can connect there, there's more healing for the world ultimately. Like, what a better community we will all be when we're all owning our stuff and seeing that we're all bleeding the same color. We're all feeling traumatized by the same things. We're all feeling upset by the same things, but we're also feeling joy in similar ways.
Yeah, that is beautiful. Oh my gosh, that's fantastic. I am like, woo, amen. Yes. it's so incredible. We're totally on the same page. Another beautiful benefit. So we've got these benefits of your healing yourself. And who doesn't want to heal? Who doesn't want to be set free, liberated from the negative emotions that happen when we look at some pieces of our past? And so absolutely becoming liberated from those emotions is so beautiful, because then we show up differently. And when we show up differently, those around us notice. And then we're leading by example. It's a way to be a leader in our own life, right? And that ripples throughout our family and our circles. And you never know what lives you're going to touch when you ripple positively. Those ripples, they come away from you. You don't know how far they reach, but they do reach, and you can make such a difference in someone's life. It's so amazing when that happens. But also what happens when you recognize how you've done what you've done, how you've done this healing, right? And working with you, it's through their own, creating a memoir, and we'll talk more about that for sure. But when you recognize how, you're transforming, and then you get past that transformation or through it, not that there's not another one in store, because there always is. But when you get through it and you look and you say, wow, this is how you do that. Now, this is where you can make an even bigger splash in the world, because now you know how you did it, and you can help other people do the same, whether it's through your story or through, for me, becoming, a coach or a mentor, or, some way that you're helping people do this the same way that worked for you, right? So it puts you in a position to be a change maker, to be a difference maker in the world, which is what people don't, that's not what they're aspiring to. They're just like, I just don't want to feel this way anymore. But when you move through it, all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm through it. I'm liberated. I feel free. I feel peaceful. I feel confident. And this is like, this is how I go through life every day. And I'm like, I want everyone to have this. Everyone, right? Isn't that amazing? It's just so amazing. So yeah. All right. So let's talk about how, right? How can we get our stories out into the world? Let's just talk a little bit more about that.
So I think, obviously I'm in the book space. So for me, the stories getting out into the world are through book form. But to kind of broaden the scope of things, people can also do this by just becoming a little more open with their inner circle and being willing to be vulnerable enough to share some piece of their past, to not be so guarded and to not hold everything in. For other people, they might like speaking more than writing, so they can turn their story into a signature talk or a keynote. And of course, there's also like sharing things on social media as long form posts, right? Writing things as blogs, submitting articles to magazines that take guest contributions. So there's lots of different ways that people can get their story out there. Now, in my line of work, so as a book coach or ghostwriter, there's really kind of two doors, right, that people walk through in getting their story out there. One is to be guided by me, where they do the writing and I'm helping with mindset, strategy, and actually crafting a really compelling book that other people want to read and that see themselves in. This is important. In order for our stories to be effective in creating transformation in others, we have to be thinking about how we shape the story and how we tell the story so it makes the most impact. So in my role as a coach, there is a lot of guidance and a lot of expertise in terms of how you actually write a compelling memoir. But there's also a lot of diving deep into what's holding you back. What are your blocks and barriers? Like, what mindsets are you coming to the table with that could be keeping you small? And I'm really employing a lot of psychology and counseling principles to draw out the full story, get to the deep emotions. It's a very vulnerable and intimate experience with really high touch kind of service. On the other side of that, there's ghostwriting. I employ all of the same things. The biggest difference is that I'm doing all of the writing and that person is doing all of the talking and sharing and giving me the information. But ultimately, in both instances, they're walking away with their story being authored by them. Regardless of who's putting words on the page, it's their story, they're the author, the transformation still lives within them, and what they go on to do with it is still theirs to do. So, either way, either door they want to walk through, they're getting me full on in those three ways: strategy, mindset, and manuscript development.
That's really wonderful. Yeah. So I think what happens is when we're telling people like, okay, get your story out there, be open, don't be so guarded. But what happens is fear. Fear is going to be like, what? Like I can't. A lot of times with our stories, when we look back and we recognize how maybe insecure we were. Like I look back at my history, like, oh my gosh, I was so insecure. I should have stood up for myself. And what happens when people look back a lot of times is they feel shame. When they feel shame, they're not really in a place where they want to be so open and share with the world all this stuff that they're ashamed of. So that's where the healing part begins, is by recognizing that you were always doing the very best you could in the moment with where you were and where you are today. You're always doing the very best. Nobody's choosing to be their worst self in any given day. We're always doing the very best we can in any given moment. And at that time, when you look back at the stories and you're like, oh, I was a doormat. I had a target on my back. I didn't think enough about myself to stand up for myself. All those things, and they invoke this emotion of shame, which is a completely useless emotion. However, the circumstances are there to help us recognize a pattern within ourselves that we need to break. And when we're finally ready to break it, that's when we're ready to look at that. And when we look at it just a little differently, not through the lens of shame, but through the lens of, well, that's where I was. And that was a gift that happened so that I could learn something eventually, even though it might not have been then. It might have been, for me, years and years and years later. So it is a beautiful thing. And to look at the story from the place of it's a gift to other people when they get to say, oh my gosh, that happened to me too, connecting with other people. So being vulnerable, being open, being willing to tell your story is a gift to others and a gift to yourself.
Yeah, I mean, well said. And this is exactly why I love memoir as a genre. Memoir straddles the line between experiencing self and older, wiser self. And this is something that people don't often know about memoir. So yes, you want to put yourself back in the moment when you were the doormat, when you were insecure, when you were feeling ashamed. But memoir is from the position of where you are now, on the other side of it. And memoir gives you the opportunity to look back on those experiences and better understand what was going on at the time, right? Because hindsight is 2020, and we often understand more of what we've been through after we've gotten away from it than when we're in it. Memoir allows you to reshape the narrative, right? And to kind of investigate and sort through what was going on at the moment. What did it mean? What did it offer you? How have you changed? How has it made you a better person, even though it was crap to go through and felt awful at the time? Memoir gives you the chance to kind of relive the experience, but through a new lens, the lens of the you who's older and wiser and has learned so much from where you were. And it's actually the garbage that you went through is the thing that's connecting the reader, because the reader's like, oh, I don't have to be so ashamed anymore that I was insecure or a doormat, because this other person has been through that too. Again, like we are faulty humans. We are complicated. We are nuanced. We have both light parts and dark parts. And when that all comes through on the page in a memoir and allows people to lean in and go, oh, so there are other people that are just like me, all of a sudden we're less alone, we're less isolated, and we are so much more hopeful that if that person could come to the other side, we can too.
Exactly. You touched upon something that I talk about a lot. And that's about the belief that it's possible. When you finally come to the conclusion that something is possible, then the next question is how. Because before that, you're not asking how, because you don't think it's possible. You don't think it's possible to heal from your past trauma and your past experiences. And then you read something like someone's memoir and you're like, oh, it's possible. So immediately your brain goes to how. How did this person do it? How might I do it? So that's why it's such a gift to give to others. It's so beautiful. So yeah. So let's talk about, okay, so the idea of writing a memoir, like, okay, that's big. I'm not starting that tomorrow. Right. So, obviously there's the mindset shift that needs to happen to understand. And we just touching upon it a little bit about reframing how you see your past. And we're touching upon this because this is the way. This is the only way. This is the way to do it, right? So let's start with like a small step. What's something really small that someone could do right now? So you're not ready to write your memoir. That's okay. What's one thing they could do right now?
So one thing that folks could do right now is to think of a story that they repeatedly tell themselves and consider the alternative. So I'm gonna frame this in an example. Right before, probably a year before I wrote my first memoir, I had this story in my head that I wasn't a dedicated enough writer, that I had constantly put writing on the back seat. And I went to this retreat. And I went specifically to get out of my own way and to figure out, like, why was I doing this to myself? And the facilitator said, go back and look for evidence in your life that suggests otherwise. So you've told yourself this story that you haven't dedicated yourself enough to your own craft. Prove that to be not true rather than assuming that it is, right?
Yep.
And I thought, challenge accepted.
Right.
So I went back and I started basically notating all of the things that I had done throughout my life that actually proved that I had spent way more time being dedicated to my craft than not being dedicated to my craft. And the story that I wasn't dedicated was really just some level of doubt or fear or imposter syndrome showing up to prevent me from going ahead and putting myself out there in this memoir. When I could actually see the evidence that this story was false and it was a bunch of BS, right? That my lizard brain had cooked up for me to keep me small, right? I was like, oh, I can't hang on to that story anymore. That story's gone bye-bye because I just disproved it.
Yeah.
So that would be my challenge, right? Is pick one thing, one small story or belief that you've constantly told yourself that's come from some experience that you've had, and consider what might actually disprove it, and then flip the script.
100%. That's the homework I give every client at least 10 times during our work together. It's like, is that true? Can you be certain it's true? Let's find evidence to the opposite. We'll do it in sessions. I'll have them do it for homework. And you are just attesting to how powerful that is. That is a very, very powerful thing. Just reframe one thing. And when you learn how to reframe one thing, because you're looking at how it might not be true, that story in your mind, right? How it might not be true. When you reframe one thing, now you're like, oh, I could do that with this other story and this other story in my head and this other, which are really beliefs, right? That keep churning. We don't know where they came from, right? Or sometimes we do, because sometimes, our parents or people around us go, here's a fear and a belief I want to give to you. And I'm going to say it ad nauseum until you believe it too. And they did it when you were a child before your brain was fully formed. And now that you're an adult, you have this, belief that you've thought so many times, these well-worn ruts, like you can't even get out of that belief. You can't, it just is, right? Until you challenge it. And when you challenge it, something amazing happens, because it's like this. It's like, if there's something that you believe is brown, that's brown, it's brown, it's brown, it's brown. But then you challenge yourself to look at any other, but wait a minute, if it's green, blue, orange, yellow, and purple also, maybe it's not brown. And your ego hates to be wrong. So as soon as you find evidence of how it's green, blue, yellow, orange, and purple, you're like, well, I can't believe it's brown anymore. I'm not going to be wrong, because obviously, look at this. So that's the way tools like this work, where we're asking, our clients to find evidence to the contrary, period. Yeah. That's it. Just find evidence. Because
memoir is like a really long exercise in that. And which is why like the perfect little starting point, because as you pointed out, if you can reframe one small narrative, then you can look at your life and go, what's the thing that I kept learning over and over and over again? Like, I thought it might be this, but maybe it's actually this, right? And that becomes the thread throughout your whole book.
Yes, exactly. And you never know where it's going to go. So like I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that I spent 45 years feeling like a victim. And I mean, I was actually bullied. I can, like, in 6th grade, and then in 8th grade, and then in 10th grade, and then in 11th grade, like physically, like people walking down the hallway smacking me in the back of the head for who knows what reason, mostly just because I was meek and I just didn't stand up for myself. They just kept getting away with it. Right. And so that was like my identity. Like, I identified as a victim. And, then, and then of course I got into a relationship with a boyfriend who also eventually hit me. And, with a terrible bad temper, thinking, what's wrong with me? I just have to be meek and walk on eggshells so that people will like me and will love me. Like, all right, I look back now, I'm like, oh my God, you poor thing. Oh, come here, let me give you a hug.
Yeah.
But the transformation from victim to hero is the most beautiful thing, that it very early on in becoming a coach, I went through that, right? Okay, so I'm in my 40s at the time. Right? I'm like, I'm just figuring this out, but oh my God. And I had done it, and it was so profound that I wanted to share it, like what you're like, and you're sharing things through memoirs. I shared it through, I created a do-it-yourself program called Power Shift, Turning Circumstance into Strength. And it's really 3 short videos, like 7 minutes long, and a little workbook that's going to take maybe an hour. And it takes people through the process that I went through to go from seeing myself and identifying as a victim to finally identifying as a hero. And it's all through that reframe. That's like a little spoiler alert, but also through intention and belief. There's a few more things in there. And then I made it into a keynote, like you were talking about earlier, making it into a keynote. My keynote is everybody has a story, how to become the hero of yours. And if someone were to ask me, like, what's the biggest transformation you ever went through? This would be my answer. I went from identifying as a victim in my life to showing up as the hero I've always been.
Mm-hmm. Mic drop. So when are you turning your keynote into a book?
I don't know. Oh, such a good question, Ally. Right?
I'm turning it back on you, says the memoir and ghostwriter.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and I love
Totally.
it. I you've made that point because truly, memoir in its best form is doing that. It's showing the protagonist, which is you, the author, going through the journey where you become the hero by the end. What's also true, though, is that you don't just become the hero by the end of the story within the book. You become the hero as the author. So it's happening twice. It's happening as the character on the page for everybody else to see, but it's happening for you, the author, as you get closer and closer and closer to sharing that story with the world and making that impact. I've got a beautiful client right now who's close to publication. His book is coming out in November. He tells a very powerful story of discovering in his 50s about being abused by a priest as a young boy. And when he came into the work, he still was holding on a little bit to the victim mindset. And through the process of telling his story, he said to me once, a long way in, he said, I'm finally ready for my story to belong to others, for me to not have to carry it around myself anymore.
Yeah.
This is huge. I get goosebumps even just telling this.
Yeah.
Activated his own healing. Not that he's ever going to be at a final state of healed, but activated a whole new level where he was finally ready to not continue to hold on to this story anymore and to give it over to the world to do its work and cascade those ripple effects. And it already started to do that just through the line editor that he chose and the cover designer that he chose and the publishing support he chose, because as they all engaged with the manuscript, they all took away things that we never anticipated. So your ripple effect through your story, it's no joke. It's such a powerful, beautiful thing. And it's also such a beautiful gift to give yourself.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. Ally, this has been such a wonderful conversation. I'm so glad to have this conversation with you. And I'm going to talk to you about a memoir. It's, I'm one of those people who's got my fingers and toes in 10 different things. I'm actually already writing a book, a relationship book, with my significant other. And and he's actually writing a second book that's much more academic, put it that way. And although he is an academic, so what am I going to do? And I had started outlining using another one, a book from another one of my podcast guests from last year. But I start and then I stop because that's kind of how I do what I do. I like get in there and I'm like, oh, interesting. That's something I put a pin in that. That's a good thing. So I believe you're right. And I definitely think that you're the person to help me do this. And I think that would be so lovely. And so I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for sharing your wisdom, your knowledge, your insight with our audience today. And is there something that you would like to share before we go? Something you can give to our audience?
Yeah, I would love for people to come on over to the rightplacerighttime.com. That's WRITE in the first place and then RIGHT in the second one. I know you'll put it in the show notes, and grab the 5-step writing guide to starting and finishing a memoir. This is a handy little reference to give you the bird's eye view on all the steps along the path from blank page to publication. So it's a great place to begin when you're an aspiring author and you have no idea what you're doing or what the mile markers are along the way.
Perfect. Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much. And like I said, head on over also to my website, lindabucher.com, where maybe I will put up Power Shift because you can't find it, but yeah, you know what? You've inspired me, Ally, to throw that up there for folks. I'm also throwing up a cool little quiz about what's your adventure archetype. So there'll be some stuff over there too. So lots of free stuff to give away to people, some other opportunities that we have beyond those. And I want to thank you again for being here. This has been such a wonderful conversation. It's been worth my while for sure.
Thank
So,
you so much.
once again, I am Linda Bucher, speaker, master certified life coach, and I'm on a mission to inspire and impact millions of people to know their worth and share their gifts and deliberately create big, beautiful ripples in the world. So if you feel stuck or unworthy or unfulfilled or out of alignment in your life or your career, I'd love to help you discover that you are the one you've been waiting for. That's our show. I'd like to thank Ally Berthiaume of The Right Place, Right Time for being here. I'd like to thank you, devoted listener and lifelong learner, for sharing your time with us today. Be sure to subscribe to Conversations Worth Your While and come back next week for another conversation that will be worth your while. And until next time, make sure that you've made this conversation worth your while by fueling the spark that it ignited.